to order. Good afternoon. This is the afternoon session for the Board of County Commissioners meeting for Tuesday, September 13th, 2022. And the first item on our afternoon agenda is a time certain item 11A, a second reading and public hearing for Ordinance 22-06 in the matter of amending Lane Code Chapter 4 to allow the Oregon Department of Revenue to act as tax administrator for transient lodging tax, address local revenue sharing, update terms, and declaring an emergency. And County Administrator, looks like you have staff with you at the table, so I will turn it over to you for a summary of the item before we open the public hearing.
Thank you, Chair. We have Jeff Kincaid, Management Analyst in County Administration here, prepared this item, so I'll turn it over to Jeff for the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mokrowski. Chair Trieger, Commissioners, the title for this item as stated by Vice Chair Trieger really sums up the purpose of this ordinance. So I'll just state staff hasn't received any feedback on this item since the first reading on August 30th. And that we recommend moving forward with adopting Ordinance 22-06 so that we may continue to move forward with transferring transient lodging tax administrator responsibilities to the Oregon Department of Revenue. If the board does pass this ordinance today, it will become effective immediately. Staff will bring forward an IGA with the Department of Revenue on your September 27th consent calendar in order to meet the targeted date of October 1st for the shift in tax administrator duties. And that is all I have for summary. I'll pass it back to you, Vice Chair Trieger, for the public hearing discussion vote. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And just to, we don't have anyone in Harris Hall, but for anyone watching, this was not something at our initiation. This is really a structural housekeeping change initiated by this, as I understand, the City of Eugene opting to shift to a model where Department of Revenue is collecting transient lodging tax. So is there anyone signed up online, Diana, to give public comment for this public hearing?
I do not see anyone signed up to give comment for the public hearing.
We have no one in Harris Hall. I will, just for the sake of a technicality, open the public hearing. And with no one from the public wishing to give comment in support or opposition of Ordinance 22-06, I will close the public hearing. Are there any commissioners with conflict of interest to declare on this item? All right. So the public hearing is closed. No conflict of interest from the board. Do staff have any additional comments?
No comments at this time. Thank you.
Then I will entertain a motion. Commissioner Bozovich.
So I'll move approval of Ordinance 22-06 in the matter of amending Lane Code Chapter 4 to allow the Oregon Department of Revenue to act as tax administrator for transient lodging tax, address local revenue sharing, update terms, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Is there a second? Commissioner Buck has seconded Commissioner Bozovich's motion. And this is a roll call vote, yes?
Correct. Ready?
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Burney.
Aye.
Commissioner Buck.
Aye.
Commissioner Bozovich.
Aye.
And Commissioner Trieger.
Aye. Right. So motion passes 4-0 with Commissioner Farr excused. And that means we can move on to the if-then scenario of item 11B for a first reading and setting of a second reading and public hearing for Ordinance 22-07 in the matter of amending Lane Code Chapter 4 to increase Lane County transient lodging tax and car rental tax in support of tourism-related facilities in Lane County. And looks like we have a few members from staff with us, so I'll turn it back to our administrator.
Thank you, Chair. We have Lauren Blythe, our Interim Director of Operations, and Christine Moody, our Budget and Financial Planning Manager. I think Lauren is going to walk through the presentation and then we're open to any questions you have.
Chair Trieger, Commissioners, thank you. Very brief introduction to the ordinance today for the first reading of the ordinance. On August 23rd, staff brought to the board a update on the proposed multi-use community facility at the Lane Event Center. And the board directed the county administrator to prepare one or more ordinances for increasing tourism-related tax rates to enhance the tourism-related facilities of Lane County, and to include an ordinance with a 2% increase to the transient lodging tax, TLT, and car rental tax, CRT. Ordinance 22-07 is being proposed today is for that 2% increase to TLT and CRT, not specifically for the proposed multi-use facility with the IMSS as an anchor tenant, but rather to enhance tourism related facilities in Lane County. And that was in response to the direction provided by the board on August 23rd. If passed today, the second reading and public hearing would be set for September 27th at 1:30. And with that,
do you have anything, Christine? Okay, so happy to entertain any questions. And again, this is a first reading, setting the public hearing and second reading.
Well, just look to my colleagues and just remind folks, because this is a first reading, if there's any substantial changes anybody's requesting, we need to make sure we take care of that today so that the board brings us what we need on the 27th. Any comments from the board? Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. I don't have any changes to the ordinance for the reading. But what I would like to do is engage staff in a little bit of a conversation so that they understand kind of what I'd like to know before I vote next week or 2 weeks from now. And, you know, one of the, we've heard a lot of testimony this morning relative to TLT and the uses. Of course, you know, my district includes Florence, which we've gotten a significant amount of email from recently objecting to the use for the multi-use outdoor facility. And kind of just objecting to any use in the city of Eugene, period. But we all know that's not terribly realistic, seeing a majority of the TLT is collected in Eugene, Springfield metro area. So a couple questions, and going back and looking at the information provided to us on August 23rd, even at the 80 million price range, even with the 2% tax, it would use up all of that 2% and still have a gap to fund of approximately 650,000 annually to make that work. And that is using up all the 2% for a projected 20-year life of a bond. Is that so? And then even if it's down 60,000, we have a little bit of an excess of about $1 million, a little over $1 million, 60 million. Sorry, yeah, sorry.
My numbers.
Yeah, sorry, 80 million to 60 million. But a lot of the questions I'm having in my mind, and I'm also hearing from the lodging industry and the travel industry, is the commitment of that. You know, we only can, the 2% is the max we'll ever be able to raise the county's portion of the transient room tax under statute, current statute. And we'd be committing it for this 20-year window. There really wouldn't be any other funds that come available during that time for these kind of projects. So the real concern I'm hearing is that means waiting 20 years for anything really big to happen in Lane County using this kind of investment, which makes me concerned about things like convention center expansion. And I know a couple of years ago, we asked Travel Lane County to move forward with phase 2 of the fiscal analysis of expanding the downtown convention center possibly. And we were talking about overbuild of our parking facility at 6th and Oak. And then, you know, to get a grand ballroom and some other facilities connected that are needed to make this competitive. Then there's the indoor sports facility we constantly hear about. I need to understand a little bit and be comfortable with the opportunity cost, which, you know, you guys understand economic terms that I'm talking to, but for the folks out there listening, that's the you know.
Let's see if you get this right.
Yeah. You know, as you spend money on one thing and don't spend it on the other, if there was a return on investment on the other, that can be considered an opportunity cost, you know, to making that decision. And that's basically what we're being faced with somewhat with this outdoor facility, is that 20-year commitment of TLT is going to create opportunity costs for us. And that's why I asked Mr. Carney for that copy of whatever preliminary economic data they have. Understanding some of these projects like the indoor sports facility are probably still 2 or 3 years behind the outdoor facility in planning and establishing a business plan, who's going to run and everything else. It's still a major facility in the minds of the travel industry and the lodging industry that draws wintertime, room stays. So that for them, they see that, without any numbers as a huge opportunity cost. And I need to understand better those numbers. So that's kind of what the data I'm looking for, is to understand opportunity costs specific to those two particular issues, is expansion of our convention, either replacement or expansion of our convention facility to make it competitive in the size market we are for conventions. And also this indoor sports facility, which seemed to be almost a direct trade-off. Or is there some miracle that's going to happen where we're not committing the entire 2% for 20 years? Is there something else up the sleeve? That's a piece I want to understand. The secondary thing I need to understand somewhat is, what is the history of minor league baseball stadiums with civic dollars? Have they been successful? I hear stories of other cities that have invested and now have an empty stadium. I look up the road at Salem Kaiser, and that stadium I pass on the highway all the time. And that's my worry, is we kind of, the M's, I love the M's, I love the team, I love the idea of keeping the M's here locally. But Major League Baseball has a really bad record of moving teams out of areas that have invested in facilities, whether it's from the major leagues on down to single A short season. So I want to understand, what is our risk? What kind of risk are we taking? Along with that, how financially stable are the M's? Do we know what their credit rating is? How financially stable are the owners of the M's? When they make a commitment to $10 million, is that, those are just some questions in the back of my mind that I'd like to kind of understand prior to voting yes or no on an ordinance to increase TRT 2%. So I know Steve was asking me that question in a conversation. I just wanted to kind of make clear some of the questions that are in my mind, because I have to answer that equity question to the people in Florence. Why invest 20 years worth of TLT in a stadium in Eugene? And I have some reasoning in my mind about making the LEC a long-term financially functioning place where it will be there in the future for an indoor sports facility. But I need to be able to kind of really go through the numbers myself and crunch them. So it'd be great to kind of get some of that information even before the board meeting next time, as much as you can supply that I have time to read, because I have a feeling I'm going to be doing a lot of reading for 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, maybe just a brief response to that. Appreciate the softball question, Commissioner. You make some assumptions, and I know what you're doing is making some assumptions to try to tease out impacts and risk and all of that. Not all your assumptions are bad, and I mean, so many of them are reasonable, but I would also say they're assumptions. So things like, for example, 20 years, I think that's probably a reasonable assumption, but it doesn't have to be a 20-year issuance. We could do 15 years, we could do 10 years. There's a number of scenarios to play with there that, I, for one, have some thoughts about it. I think one of our values and goals is to try to limit the amount of money that we're giving investors for, if we have to, for financing. And you can do that by limiting the duration of the financing. So we're going to certainly look at that in terms of options that you can pursue. You mentioned a 2%, that 2% is the most that's the 2%, just to be clear, is based, you can go higher than 2%. So you have the ability to do that. The reason that we've targeted 2% in the traveling county and others have identified 2% as viable is because that's where the market, when we look at our comparables, the market's there. So that, again, I think that's a reasonable assumption, assuming that the market stays where it's at. If the market moves in terms of transient lodging tax, that would potentially open up additional room. So we can provide additional information about, about sort of indoor versus outdoor investment and, and sort of what opportunity cost return on investment could look like there. And I understand the risk mitigation and the kind of risk, the factoring of risks. And so we can do some additional, gather some additional information for you on that front. I will say I think to your overall point, particularly on that question one, we are trying to not only look at how to limit the interest that we would pay for any, right, which is why we're trying to identify as much upfront cash funding for the project as possible, because that then lowers the amount of money that we would put into interest costs. Shoot, I lost what my point was there. Yeah.
The older you get, the more it happens.
I know, seriously, I'm starting to feel that.
If I
Yeah,
could,
go ahead.
because Commissioner Rosevich started to touch on some things. I think we're maybe just going to have a little more of a dynamic conversation than we might sometimes. But my understanding again is this ordinance allows for us to begin collection as of January, but then how we structure what is collected, what projects we assign it to for how many years, what percentage of that 2%, that is still, that's the next conversation to have, but we can't have it unless or until we pass this ordinance after second reading, right? Okay.
That will always be the case. So this morning I mentioned in Florence, we had a couple of projects the boards previously have invested in, one being the Florence Event Center, another being the downtown improvements in Florence, $5.3 million, those totaled. Those were decisions that boards of commissioners at the time made with the TLT that already had been authorized. And so the same will be true with this, that if you authorize this additional TLT, the decision on how to spend that TLT will be a future decision. The other point, Commissioner Bozovich, you made is about, I think you were trying to get at the amount available. Like how are we committing all of this 2% TLT, or will there be, we can't answer that definitively now, but I can tell you that one of our goals is to not have to spend 100% of the amount of the newly generated amount on one project. And I think, we've had a lot of conversations that TLT, there's some volatility to transient lodging tax. We want to be sort of conservative in the approach of not over allocating the resources that we may have available. In addition to the fact that this board or future boards may want to identify other projects, could be an indoor track facility, it could be projects in other parts of the county. So that's a goal that we're leading with. And so we have a lot of work to do. We can try to get closer to answering some of those questions. I will say, I don't think we're going to be able to on the 27th give you a definitive answer of this is what the project's going to cost. This is what financing will look like, because some of those things are variable in terms of what interest rates look like and all those things. But some of the assumptions you made about financing costs are not totally off. So I think you're right there. And we do believe, and again, I will say it's our goal to not have to allocate or propose a financing plan for this project, for the multi-use outdoor facility that would use up 100% of the amount generated from the new TLT.
Thank you. Is that good for the moment, or you got to?
Yeah, I was going to suggest one other thing that you may want to answer for 2 weeks from now. And that's Ron Moore's questions about other financing methods, like tax increment financing. It takes setting up a district.
Right.
And I know some of these answers myself, but it just might be good to run down why they're not a viable alternative. For these kinds of projects, partly because timeline we're talking about too, that they take years to set up, some of them.
They do. And yes, thank you for reminding that. And we will also provide additional. I mean, the general point on that is any of those other options for financing are mechanisms by which you can, but they don't actually in and of themselves come with a revenue source.
Yeah.
So revenue bonds, all that is going and saying we have revenue that will pay this bond off, but you still have to identify the revenue. A tax increment district, same thing. You have to carve out a district and say we're going to take taxes from this area and use it for that. So none of the other the core of this is you still have to have revenue. You have to have some source of revenue to be able to pay for the debt. I would argue that probably the least costly in terms of financing is the approach that we're taking. Revenue bonds tend to come with a higher interest rate because they typically the revenue that you've identified is a revenue from the source of activity, and it's more volatile, and so you have to pay a higher interest rate.
And I do know that TLT doesn't necessarily come into the decision making on lodging because it's rarely advertised in the lodging price. You know, as I go in and rent an RV space down at Darling's or out at Casey's, the price is advertised this, and when I go to actually pay for it, the dollar amount comes out higher because of the TLT that's tacked onto it. So that concern about competing with Reed Sport or Yachts, I don't really have in this discussion, but that other concern about at least answering the question of other methods of raising revenue and timing and difficulty, et cetera, I think would be a good little thing to have, at least as part of the memo.
Thank you. And was that 2%? I remember us talking about it before. Was that determined to keep us competitive in the market by our own calculations, or was that something Travel Lane shared with us?
That was true. We used the information we presented to you previously was based on Travel Lane County's own assessment. I think I would say generally that it's a commonly accepted understanding in both in the local hotel industry and among government officials and others that are involved in this, that 2% is generally where we need to go. And that's the market is really outside of just Oregon. It's the market sort of in the Western US for comparable communities like Lane County.
Thank you. Commissioner Burney.
Several comments, but I want to start by saying that I, for one, am prepared to vote on setting a second reading and public hearing. I don't need more discussion to do that. One, I hate to do this, but I love to do this. Commissioner Bozovich was very close to correct.
I was trying to do my best.
Yeah, you did. But he's right. The opportunity cost is when you do one thing. It just means you can't do these other things, and that's the cost of pursuing an opportunity. Valid point. I would like to say the following. One, I challenge anyone, if they've ever traveled, to tell me that they base their choice of hotel on the TLT. Or if they comparison shop to see if it was different in one place than it was in another place in the same county. It's not, I don't believe that's a criteria. Two, as we move forward, I think Chair Trieger is 100% correct. This is the first step in the process is this vote. I will be very concerned if, in fact, I would vote against a 15 or a 20-year commitment that exhausted, right? I know that's not what we want, that exhausted all of the TLT that either this proposal or that we have. There are too many opportunities, and we don't want to isolate ourselves from being able to pursue others. I will also be interested in negotiations to see if the M's can up the ante a bit. I don't know. You probably have had those, you probably know, but I haven't had them and I don't know. I'm very supportive of this happening. I'm also, if you recall the discussion we had when we last talked about this, we modified the thing so it wasn't just to look at outdoor and indoor facilities at the Lane Event Center, but it was also other properties that Lane County owns to keep the options open. I know that, I know that's important to some and it's important to me. So Chair, I'm prepared to vote. And I'm prepared to have the discussion I just teased when we start talking about distribution. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, and you're correct. It's, as it says in our packet, what this would do is increasing to allow us to finance or refinance debt of tourism-related facilities. It's that broad at this stage. Yeah. Commissioner Buck, did you want to make any comment? All right, then I'm prepared to entertain a motion. Commissioner Buck?
I'll move approval of the first reading and setting of the second reading and public hearing on ordinance 22-07 as stated for September 27th, 2022 at 1:30 p.m.
Second.
Commissioner Buck has moved. Commissioner Burney has seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 4-0 with Commissioner Farr excused. Thank you, everyone. This morning, we had some county administrator announcements, but I want to make space to insert another opportunity in case there were any that you missed being able to make since you had to leave us for another appointment this morning. Steve.
I don't have any others. I know you had some other things under commissioner business to
Great.
talk
Yeah.
about.
Then we'll move on to item 12, Commissioners' Business. Any announcement from commissioners? Commissioner Burney.
I apologize, commissioners. I have three. One, I want to invite the public. I want to invite all commissioners, any county staff. Excuse my voice. This Saturday, September 17th, 4 groups are having an open house. Calc, Citizens and Laity combined, along with SAFER, Springfield Alliance for Equity and Respect, along with Carry It Forward, along with a Springfield Citywide Union of Activists. Open house at 530 C Street, which is called Unity House in Springfield from 1 to 3. And about 1:30, it's really going to be my honor to present scholarships to 2 young people who have exemplified courage and leadership in their community, trying to make it better for those most vulnerable. These will be called the Springfield Youth Social Action Scholarships, and everyone's invited to this event. That was the first one. The second one is on October 6th, Deschutes County and Deschutes 350 are convening a Go Clean Energy Conference in Bend. Sponsors include not only Point Community Credit Union, First Interstate Bank, Neil Kelly Builders, Deschutes County Solid Waste, Energy Trust of Oregon, but also one of the presenters earlier this morning, the Merite Hotel Group, are sponsoring this. It's free to all students, and it'll be my honor to host the panel dealing with, of all subjects, finance at that particular event. And third, finally, and thank you, Chair, I'm trying to do this as quick as I can. I would like to acknowledge people that have been brought to my attention. Margaret Sullivan, who's an office assistant 2 at Environmental Health, Annette Brenton Krecklau, Senior Office Assistant, Environmental Health, and Cindy Reynoso, Senior Office Assistant. They have 65 years of combined experience working in environmental health at Lane County. For those of us that don't think about it that much, many of the hoteliers here think about it because they're responsible for inspecting restaurants, swimming pools, motels, hotels, water quality, mosquitoes, bats, dog bites. The list goes on and on. These individuals were mentored by a gentleman I knew named Jeff Lang. Under Lang's leadership, the program has become self-sustaining with new ideas, inclusiveness, and revenue streams, creating a positive atmosphere and workforce excellence. These 3 are the backbone of Lane County's environmental health program. They were brought to my attention by the group that represents them, AFSCME, and I wanted to just have the honor of personally and publicly acknowledging these 3 ladies for their contributions and their support to an organization that Mr. Mokrahysky leads. So thank you, Chair. Those were my announcements.
Any other announcements? All right. Future assignment requests, and Commissioner Buck.
I have one for the board. I am looking for head nods for us as a board to sign on to a joint letter to the Speaker of the House and perhaps also the Senate President, wildfire committees, urging the continuation of those committees in the upcoming legislative session. We are looking to also add Marion County and Lincoln County as a minimum, but we may get more. But it would be better if we put out this particular letter as a board.
Oh, I'm sorry, head nods, yes.
Do you need anything else sort of procedurally, like timing wise, or for that to just come back on consent calendar? Or?
No, we'll just have the chair sign the letter when staff is ready.
Great. Any other assignments before I offer mine? All right. So as I mentioned this morning, we've been hearing a lot about some capacity challenges in the DA's office, and the county administrator will have an update for us on specifically on staffing capacity in the DA's office, either in response to this and or on the 27th at his discretion. But I'd like to get head nods to direct county administrator and the DA, the sheriff, and our new community justice department director, Greg Rickoff, to review and update the 10-year public safety plan. I've been reviewing that generally, but particularly in light of the challenges in the imbalances in the system overall and the DA's office particularly. So I thought that asking for staff, it's time. It was a 10-year plan adopted at the end of 2014 to make it a formal assignment to have a review and recommendations to updates to that plan come back to us.
Assume you've read the updated version, not the 2014 version.
Well, I think the plan overall
Okay.
is what I'm asking to have.
Yeah, 'cause
So-
it's been updated once, 2 years ago. I'm trying to remember,
Probably 3. No.
maybe 3. Okay. And it probably does stand looking at it again, but yeah, we made significant changes. Like we brought in some agencies that weren't in the plan previously, like mental health, and focused on a much broader view of the system rather than just what was directly in community corrections.
In the original plan, yeah. So with that, just as a broader assignment, and then leave it to that team to tell us which pieces need the most attention and where. Great, thank you. Great. Then with that, item 13, review of assignments.
So I have the 2 requests in addition to the requests that were made under the first reading previously, but we'll just take that as part of the report back on September 27th. Commissioner Buck requested that the chair sign a joint letter to the Oregon legislature urging the continuation of wildfire committees. So you get that right. So we'll just ask maybe that Commissioner Buck works with Alex Kyler and Steve Adams to get that language and then have the chair sign that. Second was Commissioner Trieger's request for an update, maybe a report and update on the 10-year public safety plan by the sheriff, DA, community justice, rehabilitation director, and county administrator, and other partners. Health and Human Services should be involved as well with behavioral health. So I had those 2.
Great, thank you. And did you want to give any update on the staffing plan for the
Sure,
office or bring
yeah.
it back?
Happy to just say that, we have, I've had a number of conversations or communication with the district attorney, both via email, and had an opportunity to meet with DA Perlow last Friday to just better understand the staffing challenges. And, the overall concern I think that the DA has is, as with many of our areas in this organization and many other organizations, she's seen turnover. I believe had around 9 positions that have 9 people that have left over the course of the last 9 to 12 months. 3 of those positions are still vacant. So they have hired and they've continued to hire. 3 of them are currently vacant. So I want to provide that context information. The DA, and I will also say the board has met with the district attorney in executive session to also discuss these issues. They really are 3. One is a concern related to competitive compensation, which is something that we desire for all of our employees. The compensation is within market. 2 is related to workload, that there's a lot of workload challenges, certainly in the court system and in this local community. Some of that is driven by COVID and sort of the slowdown that happened in the court system during the COVID years. And that that pick up now. So workload is 2. And then 3 is just the challenges with the space they continue to occupy. So all of those are being worked on, but particularly on number 1 related to compensation. I met with our team yesterday, and our HR labor team is going to be meeting with the district attorney tomorrow to talk about what some options may be, and then further those through the conversations with our prosecuting attorneys. So I just want the board to know that we continue to be responsive and work on that issue. That is something that you hear often about, the challenges we have with staffing in a lot of critical areas. You're likely to see more and more, I shouldn't say more and more, so that but in the near future, more discussion about recruitment, retention, structures for recruiting and retaining, particularly really difficult to recruit and retain employees. And think about in the medical and the physical health, the behavioral health, and the law enforcement arenas are particularly really difficult to recruit for nationally. That's a dynamic and something that we certainly are facing here in our local community. So the problem not resolved yet, but I think hopefully on a path and doing what we can do to address the concerns and issues.
Great, appreciate that. We have no executive session scheduled. Is there any other business to attend to today? If not, and with that, I will adjourn the meeting.